Okay, here we go. We finished with Hegel. We're moving into Marx, as in Karl Marx. He was born in Trier, which is in the Rhineland, in 1818. Okay. He was of Jewish origin. His father was a lawyer, and he will later go into the study of law. But his father became a Protestant. So, although you might say ethnically he's Jewish, he's also, well, he isn't. And how religious he was as either a Jew or a Protestant is only God knows. Anyway, he went to Bonn to study law, as urged by his father. And then later he went to Berlin, where he studied philosophy. Okay. He wrote his dissertation on the difference between, maybe I better write that out. The difference between the Democratian and Epicurean philosophies of nature. And this was submitted at the University of Vienna in 1841. He was associated, especially because he had been in Berlin, where Hegel was, Hegel had died in 1831. However, there were Hegel's successors, and especially what were called the young Hegelians. Instead of young, read left wing. And there were some other interesting characters involved there. There's Bruno Bauer. These are all household names. Well, they were in left-wing Hegelian circles. Bruno Bauer, Arnold Ruge. You don't have to remember these, but anyway. Arnold Ruge, Max Stirner, whom Marx refers to as Saint Max, Sankt Max. Anyway, Max Stirner, and let's see, Feuerbach, Ludwig. And Feuerbach has quite an influence on Marx. And of course then later, Engels, later Engels, okay, and then of course there's also this rather interesting Russian Mikhail Bakunin, the Russian revolutionary, okay? However, because of his association with these rather disreputable characters, He was never given a roof. A roof is a call, and that means a call by a provincial university to be a professor of philosophy at that university. He never got it, right? Never came. So what does he do? He turns to, he turns to journalism. Which helps us to understand why Marx's style, his German style, is much more readable than Hegel's. Right? Hegel is hard to read. So he turned and he first establishes the Rhenish newspaper this is in Cologne. In 18, let's see, in Cologne. And because of various censorship laws, he's forced to resign from in 1843. Okay. In 1843, he marries Jenny von Westphalen. The von might indicate that she was of aristocratic heritage. Anyway, and by all accounts, it was a happy marriage. Then he goes with Ruga. Remember Ruga? He goes to Ruga in 18. Ruga to Paris. And he establishes with Ruga the German-French journal. It produces one issue, and then it goes out of publication. Incidentally, one of the reasons why he left Cologne to go to Paris is because the Prussian authorities were after him, right? And they were, wherever he went, the Prussian authorities were putting pressure on the local officials to get rid of the guy. So he spent a lot of time moving around, and so now he's in Paris. It goes one issue and then it folds. However, in 1844, can you still see this? In 1844, he becomes associated more with Engels. Okay, and he spends in Paris. He's reading about economic theory, right? And more specifically, the classical economists, David Smith and Ricardo, right? David Ricardo and Adam Smith, especially so he's reading about economic theory when he's in Paris. Then again, pressure comes from the Prussian government, right? Which has always been on his tail, and so he moves to Brussels. From Paris to Brussels. still on the run. In 1848, he produces the Communist Manifesto. Communist Manifesto. Okay, 1848. 1848 is a big year. That's the year of revolutions in Europe. And the Communist Manifesto, right? Workers of the world unite, you have nothing to lose but your chains. Sounds good. Anyway, when the revolt happens in France, he's got to leave France too. So he goes to Cologne and goes back to Cologne, remember Cologne? And there he establishes the new Rhenish newspaper, Neue Rheinische Zeitung. And needless to say, Prussia is still on his heels, and he gets expelled. So he goes to London, right? And when he was not ill, right, he did not find the climate in England salubrious, which of course at the time, because remember they were burning coal, and coal which was heavy, it wasn't anthracite coal, it was very dirty coal. And it produced the famous London fogs. Right? That's how they heated their houses, with coal. Well, because they had coal mines. And anyway, so when he was not ill, he worked at the British Museum. And what he's doing there, museum, that's an M. What he's doing there is reading more economic theory. But he's also producing articles for the New York Daily Tribune, right? And remember Engels? Engels, whose family was involved in textiles, right? Which of course became big in England, was able to support Marx. If it hadn't been for Marx, if it hadn't been for Engels, Marx wouldn't have made it. Anyway, in 1864, he established the International Workingmen's Association. The IWA. And in 1867, he produces volume 1 of his classic work, Das Kapital, which means capitalism. Volume 1. 2 more volumes would be produced after his death, I think edited largely by Engels. So in 1881, his wife Jenny dies. Okay. And then in 1883, Marx dies, or Karl dies. Okay, and he's buried in Hyde Park in London. Okay, so that's Marx's life. It was a turbulent life. Okay, let's take a look at. Okay, we're going to erase the board because we need the space. Okay. The texts that we'll be using are those put together by Baltimore. Okay, and be sure you get the right set of texts. TB Baltimore. It's selected writings in sociology and social selected writings in sociology and social philosophy. Okay, now you have to get the right one of these things. I could give you the ISBN number.
I'll just put a link to it on Moodle. I'll find it on Amazon or on another website.
Okay, but be sure you get the right volume, because it's Baltimore has two sets of selections, and it's the one first published by McGraw-Hill, paperback edition in 1964. Okay. Okay, anyway, let's take a look. We might as well plunge into Marx. Why not? This is a little on page 51. He says, what he's going to do, that the anatomy of civil society is to be sought in political economy. The anatomy of civil society, which of course is what civil society, which is what Hegel's always talking about. Civil society is to be sought in political economy. Underline economy. Okay. The study of the latter, which I began in Paris, in 1844, I continued in Brussels after he got kicked out of Paris, where I had emigrated, kicked out, on account of an expulsion order by Monsieur Guizot. Right? In other words, pressure was put on the minister, Monsieur Guizot, by the Prussian government, and so Marx had to leave Paris. The general conclusion at which I arrived, and which, once reached, continued to serve as the guiding thread in my studies, may be formulated briefly as follows. In the social production, right? Production. Remember, Hegel starts with property. Marx starts with production. In the social productions, when you read social in Marx, think economy, right? Think economics. Social means economics, basically. The general conclusion which I in social production, which men carry on, they enter into definite relations that are indispensable and independent of their will. Okay, what is Marx's definition of the human being? Is that he is an ensemble, French, ensemble of relations. And above all, these relations either are economic, have to do with production, or they have economic ramifications. These relations of production correspond to a definite stage of development of the material powers of production. Well, as we'll see, societies go through various stages in how and what it produces. But what he's saying here essentially is the totality of these relations of production constitutes the economic structure of society. Okay. The political, right? The political follows from the economic. What he's saying there is, well, we've got the totality of these relations of production. Well, what do you got? You got blue-collar workers. You have white-collar workers. And what else? And you've got, well, blue-collar workers, white-collar workers, in the same economy. And he goes on to say, and to which definite forms of social consciousness correspond. Right? In other words, a blue-collar worker will have a social consciousness different from that of a white-collar worker. The mode of production of material life determines the general character of the social, political, and spiritual processes of life. Right? It is not the consciousness of men that determines their being, but on the contrary, their social being determines their consciousness. Right? I could give you that in German if you like, but it's not their to repeat it. The mode of production determines the special. It is not the consciousness of men that determines their being, as Hegel might say, but on the contrary, their social being determines their consciousness. The social being determines consciousness. Right? And that means individual, right? And of course, social always implies consciousness. Okay. It is not the consciousness of, okay, right. At a certain stage in their development, the material forces of production in society come in conflict with the existing relations of production. Okay, in other words, a society may go through various stages where the relations of production, okay, for example, moving from an agrarian society to an industrial one, to a service one, to an information one. Those are all different societies, okay? Well, I mean, for example, at the moment, how many people are involved in the agrarian part? Probably about 4%. How many people are in, well, we're no longer in the industrial nation we were, probably about 17%. People involved in service, more, a whole bunch more, right? Most people are in the service economy, right? And information is they're even more involved in that. How many people are working up at Microsoft in Redmond? What is it? 5,000? More than that. Anyway, thousands of people are working. Not right now. They're working at home. Okay. So anyway, okay. Then of course, needless to say, There are also the unemployed. Right? Well, before the coronavirus hit, the unemployment rate was about 3.5%, which was very good, which is good. But with the coronavirus and after, it may be up to, according to some economists, it may be up to 20% unemployed as a result of the mess we're having now. But don't worry, I'll still be here. Well, we'll find that. We're not going to make any predictions on that score. Anyway, so where were we? Over on page 52, whenever you move from one type of economy to another, because you develop not only a different social consciousness, there occurs a period of the move from an agrarian economy to industrial one to a service one. It's revolutionary, right? It's a revolutionary change. In fact, that's what Marx said. Then occurs a period of social revolution. Because remember, everything is going. Everything, not only the political, but also the legal, right? And even the religious, right? It's going to change. So. In considering such transformations, the distinction should always be made between the material transformation of the economic conditions of production, which can be determined with the precision of natural science. You can give statistics. And the legal, political, religious, aesthetic. That means like art. Huh? The art produced in these different economies will be different. So what else is legal, religious, aesthetic, or philosophical, right? The philosophy associated with an agrarian economy will be very different from that with that of an industrial one, and so on down the line. In short, ideological forms in which men become conscious of this conflict and fight it out. Right? In other words, you get social unrest when you move from one type of economy to another. Just as our opinion of an individual is not based on what he thinks of himself, so can we not judge of such a period of transformation by its own consciousness, right? Hegel would say you can't jump out of your skin. Marx is going to say you have to, right? On the contrary, this consciousness must rather be explained from the contradictions of material life, from the existing conflict between the social forces of production, and the relations of production. No social order ever disappears before all the productive forces for which there is room in it have been developed, right? The industrial will move as far as it can until it can move no further and fill up the whole of the society as much as it can. However, the seeds of the new order are in the old, in the previous one, right? I mean, for example, the industrial economy, industry was already present in the agrarian, right? In other words, you had you needed at least the industry to produce plows, harrows, reins for the horses, right? So there was industry. The seeds of the Industrial Revolution are already in the agrarian, and similarly, the seeds of the service economy are also are already in the industrial. No social order ever disappears before all the productive forces for which there is room in it have been developed. And new higher relations of production never appear before the material conditions of their existence have matured in the womb of the old society, right? In other words, you're going to get the service economy, you're going to get the preparation for that already in the industrial. Well, okay, let's, why don't we move over to the next page, right? Over on page 53, about the second paragraph there. The first premise of all human history is, of course, the existence of living human individuals. And what's a living individual? He's an ensemble of relations, which ultimately have an economic basis or meaning. The first fact to be established, therefore, is the physical constitution of these individuals and their consequent relation to the rest of nature. Of course, we cannot here investigate the actual physical nature of man. He's not going to be doing physical anthropology, or natural conditions in which man finds himself. He's not going to be doing cultural anthropology. All historiography, must begin from these natural bases and their modification in the course of men's activity. At least in Feuerbach, I erased his name, at least in Feuerbach, nature still has the meaning of something that the human being can wander around in. Right? By the time you get to Marx, the real meaning of nature is, the real meaning of nature is raw material, right? Okay? That's Marx. Okay, a little further. Men can be distinguished from animals by consciousness, by religion, or by anything one likes. Law also. Religion also. But they themselves begin to distinguish themselves from animals as soon as they begin to produce their means of subsistence. What do producers produce? Producers produce a product, right? Okay? Produce their means of subsistence, a step which is determined by their physical constitution, an opposable thumb, right? Your thumb is good at, well, what do we call Homo faber? Right. Okay. They produce as distinguished from those that are simply hunters and gatherers, right? Forget hunters and gatherers, as far as Marx is concerned. You don't become a real society or a civilization until you produce your means of sustenance, right? So it's what you produce, not what you find. In other words, until you become agrarian. Right? Any history before that, as far as Marx is concerned, is totally uninteresting. He's not interested in it. It is already a definite form of activity of these individuals, a definite way of expressing their life, a definite mode of life. Well, that of being a farmer. As individuals express their life, so are they, right? I mean, after all, what is a baker? A baker bakes bread, and that's what a baker is. As individuals express their life, so they are. What they are, therefore, coincides with their production. Baker, baking bread. And what they produce and how they produce it. How do they produce it? Well, they have these machines that do the dough, or you can do it by hand, right? And then you let it sit and rise, and then you punch it down again. Then you let it rise again, and then you put it in shapes that you want to, and then you shove it in the oven and bake it, right? Okay? And what they produce and how they produce it. What individuals are, therefore, depends on the material conditions of their production. Well, bread need not be made the way in which a boulanger in Paris, in a boulangerie, makes bread, makes baguettes. It can be produced by factories, otherwise known as do they still have Wonder Bread?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Anyway, Wonder Bread is machine produced, and I recall when I was in India, right, where everything was done by hand. There was one company that bragged about the fact that its product was made by a machine. That it wasn't made by hand. Okay, so if you develop an economy or society, or if you produce things by means of a machine, that's very different from the way than if it is produced by hand. Okay, well anyway, let's quit. I'm tired. And again, our producer and director for this series is Brother Damien. Be sure and offer him a prayer. Amen.